last week we were talking about the Word being in alignment with the Word, abiding in Him, in the Word. And tonight we're going from alignment to discernment. And alignment is important. Alignment is very important. When we come into alignment with God, we get our heart right. Our spirit is right with God, right? Our life is positioned to hear Him clearly when we're in alignment with Him, right? But that's not where it stops. Alignment isn't where it stops. You know, we come into alignment, but that's the beginning, really. Because once you're aligned, we have to discern what comes next, right? And so there's a lot of people that are aligned but are stuck. You could be aligned and still be stuck, right? And it's not because God's not speaking or God's not moving, right? It's because for some reason or another, we may lack the ability to discern what's happening in that season or in that moment. And so discernment is very important, because if we discern incorrectly, then we will respond incorrectly, right? But if we discern correctly, then we'll respond correctly. So discernment is very important for us in approaching spiritual warfare. And here in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, we'll read that in a little bit. Well, let's just read it now. It says, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, right? Pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, right? And then what does Jeremiah tell us in chapter 1, or what does God tell Jeremiah for that matter? He says, see, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out and to pull down, to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant. So before God builds, He exposes. Has anybody had any construction projects done on their house? Sometimes we'd rather just put tile over the tile and not tear anything down, because when we tear it down, we know that there might be a mess back there that we're going to have to deal with. I remember when I was doing construction on my house that we rent now, and man, this place was the ugliest looking house in the city of Lenox. That says a lot, okay? Because you could just drive up and down throughout the neighborhood and see that there's a lot of worn down and tore up buildings in that neighborhood. And my house was the worst of them all. It was bad. I mean, the floors were in such bad shape, it was like, would have been a dream for kids with some cars, you know, because they'd be going like just on it'd like skip jumps, because, I mean, it was just, I mean, I don't even know how does this even happen, right? There was in such bad shape. Certain areas of the bathroom and even in the kitchen, if you were to step in those areas, then your foot might fall through the floor. Okay, the electrical was in. It was the two wires, the black and the white wire separately, and then it came to these like porcelain things. If anybody knows about electrical, it's like very old technology electrical, and it just, you couldn't have the refrigerator plugged in and the TV on at the same time. Otherwise, the breaker would trip and stuff. And so I decided to go into this house and just gut the whole thing. And it was a project. I think it took me, I did it fairly quickly, considering it was just myself and Joe Delatorre. You remember Joe? Joe Tell a Story, right? Yeah, we used to call him Joe Tell a Story. He's a good guy, tender heart, but he was homeless and he had some addiction issues that he would battle with. And so I would go over. Man, he lived in a better neighborhood than I did. It was in a tent, off the side of the freeway, but it was in a good neighborhood. All right. I mean, he was right there. Manhattan Beach, Lawndale, and then Redondo Beach were just kind of like in that intersection. And so, I've never lived in Manhattan Beach. I don't think I could afford to buy a house in Manhattan Beach. I know I couldn't, but Joe lived there. and so I just kind of chuck some rocks at his tent. Joe, he go, oh, I'm up. What's up? I'm coming. And then he'd come and help me out. And man, the guy knew everything about construction. I'd always be like, man, Joe, how do you know all of this stuff? Oh, man, I read a book about it when I was in prison. It's like, geez, man, I guess you have a lot of time to read books while you're in there. Sounds like something Joe would say, right? Kobe knew Joe. Did he ever babysit you? Yeah. You know what? Let me just tell you something about Joe. He had a lot of hang-ups, a lot of issues in his life, but he could be trusted with children. It's that is something that you don't see very often. And I remember I was saying, hey, Joey, man, you could get this job making such and such an hour, and that turns into X amount of money a year. And he was like, oh man, I've never made that much money in my life. I said, Joe, you've made that much money in the past 5 months with me. What are you talking about, dude? I've been paying you. It's hard to find somebody that could do that level of work for $10 an hour under the table, And so, but Joe helped me out. And so Joe and I we gutted this house. I know I'm kind of going off track and stuff, but I love Joe very, very much. I've known him for a very long time. And I got to, when he died, I did his funeral. And he's impacted a lot of lives. There were a lot of people there for that funeral. It's amazing the amount of people that he impacted with all his hang-ups and not being perfect. Right? But he didn't let that stop him from being a blessing to others. And you could leave money laying around and he wouldn't steal. Never stole a dime. Not from me. Not from anybody I know. Maybe if you left some jugs around, then he might have picked that up. But that would have been a different story. But I guess it's fair game. But God exposes. I'm talking about God exposes things, right? So we go into this house, we gut the whole thing, and then all of a sudden, once everything is removed, and everything that you couldn't see that was behind the walls, I have pictures somewhere on my phone of a massive beehive that was behind the wall next to the electrical panel. Massive beehive. Rodent nests that were inside the house, inside the walls. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? I befriended some cats and started feeding some cats, and they took care of it for me of the rodent problem. Never had a rodent problem again. And because we had this little one-eyed cat we called Popeye. Had a one eye and a crooked tail, and we would feed. One time, the rat came, and from outside, we had the door open, and it ran inside the house. And I told Popeye, I said, "Listen, Popeye, I ain't feeding you for nothing, all right? You go find me a rat and you kill it, all right? Otherwise, I'm not going to feed you anymore." This is what I told Popeye. Hours later, Popeye comes to the back of the house with a dead rat right at the door. You know what? And ever since then, Popeye would bring us mice and rats, and now we're just like, "Hey, look, I'm earning my keep." I said, "Good, all right, we all have to earn our keep. We ain't feeding you for nothing." So we just in the bathroom, everything got exposed, and I just saw so many things. It was so bad, the house behind the walls, and then ended up redoing all the electrical, redoing all the plumbing. I did all the plumbing. I did everything. I did all the incoming and outgoing plumbing on my own because my dad was a plumber. That doesn't mean that I know what I'm doing. That just means that I'm still too cheap to pay somebody else to do it, right? Because, that could get expensive. And then I just paid somebody else to do all of put in the new panel and the electrical, because we were gonna live in that house for a season, my family and I just didn't want my family to get set on fire. If we had a clogged toilet or whatever, then that I could deal with that. But a fire, I don't know. So I hired somebody else to do that. And it was everything. We just gutted everything. And there were so many things that were exposed. And I felt like this whole project that I was doing on this house, the outside of the house still looked like, pardon my language, but a crack house. I mean, it really did. It looked like it looked bad, all right? But I felt like the Lord was saying, "I want you to rebuild this house from the inside out." And the only way that you could rebuild this house is if you expose everything that's inside. And so I exposed everything that was inside. And then I turned this 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house into a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, and added a bathroom, and eventually ended up moving the square footage out towards the front and then out towards the back, and just expanded the whole thing, added a laundry room and all this stuff. It was a lot of fun. And every step of the way, I felt like it was this. I felt like everything that I was doing, and maybe I just over-spiritualize everything, but I really felt like the Lord was just really showing me something in this. It took me about, I don't know, I think it took me about 9 months to do the whole thing, to gut the whole place, and then to to redo one entire bathroom completely, and then add another bathroom, redesign and do the whole kitchen, change the whole floor plan of the entire house. It took me about 9 months to do it. I'd never done something like this ever before in my life. But so I had, some money from the sale of my other house, and so I used it for that, and I knew I had a very limited amount, and I wasn't about to spend $200,000. I didn't have $200,000 to pay a contractor to do the job for me, and so I was working on a very, very small budget, and we stretched it out and made it happen. And by the time I was finished with the inside, I moved on to the outside. And then everybody that was they were on the main street over there on Inglewood Avenue and 111th Street, right across the street from Rose's Donuts over there in Lenox. And by the time I was finished with the outside, people would walk up and they would say, "Man, you have the most beautiful house in all of Lenox." And people would come up and they would say, this house doesn't look like it belongs here. It looks like it belongs in Manhattan Beach. That's what they would say, for real. And to me, that was just, wow. And one guy told me, another homeless man that was in the area that used to come and just, I would let him, like, he wanted to do plants and stuff and gardening. And so he was like, here, let me help you with your plants and stuff. So I would just chit chat with him and stuff. And he said, you're the hardest Puerto Rican I've ever met. You work like a Mexican. That's what he told me. I was like, well, thank you. I appreciate that. He was Mexican. And he was like, yeah, normally Puerto Ricans are lazy. I was like, hey, what do you mean, man? Like, have you met my father? But it was such a transformation that took place. And there was one guy in this neighborhood, and I'm sharing this because I'm sharing what this prophetic act that I was doing. This was a prophetic act, the rebuilding of this house, the exposing of everything inside, and the rebuilding of everything inside. Really, when we allow the Lord to speak to us through working inside a house with no air conditioning, no ventilation, and all this stuff, and in the heat of the summer and all that stuff, and you still are able to hear the Lord in that type of environment, then he could train you to hear him in all kinds of environments. One day I was across the street at this restaurant that's connected to a meat market, and we're eating there, and there's one guy that is just very well known. He's very actively involved in the community. Every Cinco de Mayo, they do a parade over there, and he kind of is like a chairman for the board for many years on leading that. And so he's very a community involved guy, and he loves the city of Lenox. And he is not a believer, a Christian believer. He's a believer in a higher power, right? But I remember we were in the restaurant that's across the street, and it's kind of like a hangout spot for everybody that kind of lives in the neighborhood. And so I was there, and he just said, hey, you should run for mayor. Yeah, you need to be the mayor. I was like, what? He said, yeah, you need to be the mayor of Lenox. Lenox doesn't have a mayor. First of all, like it's the mayor of Los Angeles, but they have somebody that's like some sort of delegate or something like that. All right, and but I understood what he meant behind that, or by that, and the thing was that he had recognized in the authority that I carried. And authority, you see, you can operate in power and you can operate in authority, but they're not the same. You see, power is, or let's start with authority. Authority is a police officer has a badge, right? He has authority. He also has a gun, and he has power. Some people can have power and no authority. Some people can have authority and not have power. I want both. I want authority and I want power. Right? Not for me, it's for the glory of God. And so with that authority that the police officer carries when in having his badge, it means that he is a representative of something greater, of a larger authority, and he carries the authority of that city, of that state, right, or whatever government entity, right? He carries that authority, and whoever he speaks to has to has to take notice of the authority that they carry, because it's not just their own. They carry the authority of another. Right? And if somebody doesn't want to pay attention to that authority, they want to disrespect that authority, or they want to rebel against that authority, then he has power to enforce the authority that he carries. And in the spirit realm, we carry authority and power. We can carry authority and power. Not all Christians carry authority. There's a lot of Christians that have no power. And there's a lot of Christians that have no authority. They have salvation, but they don't have power or authority. And we want to walk in both. So before God builds up, he exposes, okay? And before God plants, he uproots. He uproots. You know, if you just cut a plant without uprooting it entirely, and then you just plant another plant on top of that, then the old plant, because the roots are still down there, when you're watering that other plant, it also adds as fuel to the one that you thought was gone, but it was still living beneath the surface. And then all of a sudden, where you thought you had only a bougainvillea growing, right? All of a sudden, a star jasmine sprouts up beneath that, right? And then there's this intertwining, and then there's two plants there and not just one. So before we can plant the new one, we need to uproot the old one. So before God plants, he uproots, right? This is what he's telling Jeremiah. And so before there's breakthrough, there is discernment. And so I'm working on that house, and I expose everything and then begin to rebuild, so that before there was that breakthrough, before when people walked by, they didn't have the vision to see that house for the untapped potential that was hidden inside. It wasn't until it was revealed to them by the one that was willing to break it down and build it back up. That's when they were able to see that clear picture. And then they were like, oh, wow, look at this. This house belongs in this neighborhood. This house belongs in Manhattan Beach, right? And this is what God does with us. When we begin to discern, and when we see what God is doing inside of us, and we allow him to work inside of us, and we partner with him, we allow God to uproot. And when we're ministering to others, we uproot. And then we sow new seeds to the glory of God in others. We begin to see something flourish that wasn't seen before. But when it's revealed, upon that revealing and upon that revelation of Jesus, of that encounter with Jesus, that unveiling, then other people take note. They recognize, they're like, wow, you don't belong here. You look like somebody, and you talk like somebody, you act like somebody from somebody else. Well, yeah, I'm not of this world. I'm in the world, but I'm not of the world. I'm of the kingdom of heaven. And this is what transformation looks like. It starts with individuals. starts with one person believing God for transformation for themselves or for another, and then other people take notice. They see it, and they want that for themselves. So many people came, they were like, oh, can I rent the house? I want to move in, like all this stuff. Like, no, I'll break it in first. And there were still people being murdered. Once every 3 months, there were still people I could look out my front window, and I had my cameras and stuff. I would record stuff all the time, and there were 3 marijuana dispensaries across the street from me at the time, and it was, once every 3 months, somebody would get murdered right outside. I would see it outside my front window. It was a very difficult place to be and to live. And I have a whole story of how I knew that the Lord had called us to be there for that season. I didn't know how long, but I was just being obedient to the Lord. And I felt like the Lord taught me a lot through that. And it didn't come without challenges. It never comes without challenges when we say yes to God. Saying yes to God and allowing Him to work inside of us, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be easy. In fact, it might get harder. If you're doing it, if you're following God right, it will get harder, okay? But we don't put our trust in our own strength, right? We put our trust in Him. And it's in Him we find our peace. It's in Him we find our joy. And so it was a very powerful season. It was a very powerful season. And I felt like the Lord really showed me a lot in that. So one day I was leaving the church, came out of my office, and I think Pastor Rick had some sort of banquet with the South High track team here at the church. And so there was a bunch of boxes that were left over that were just out there after they cleaned up and stuff, from probably T-shirts and a bunch of different things. And so I hadn't been praying about moving. I hadn't been praying about asking God, hey, when do you want me to leave? When do you want us to leave? Or anything like that. None of that stuff had happened. And then when I walked down the stairs, I saw those boxes. I felt clearly the Lord say, grab the boxes, take them home, and tell your family that you got to pack up because you're moving. This is how the Lord kind of just talks to me, dude. It's crazy. And so I grab the boxes, I throw them in the car, I go home, and it was about like folded up. It was about like that many boxes, all right? And so I grab this stack of boxes, I drop them in the living room, and I said, hey guys, start packing because we're leaving. Oh, really? When? I don't know. Where are we going? I don't know. But the Lord told me to pack because we're leaving. And so it kind of, for me, it always looks like this: do this and then watch me show up. And so we started packing. I mean, we didn't pack everything. We didn't know where we were going, but then we felt a release to look around. And so we wanted to be closer to the church, but we didn't. We were looking around. We didn't really find, and we loved the city of El Segundo. We would go to their farmers market on Thursday nights and stuff, or on Thursdays as a family, and just go to the farmers market. We just liked El Segundo. And so we looked at El Segundo, and there was a friend of ours that was moving out of his house. That was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, and kind of near the high school there, and in a great neighborhood. I learned one of the things that I learned is that I will never fall in love with a house. I will only fall in love with the community. And if I love the community, then I could live in any house. But how many of you know you could live in the most beautiful house, and if you don't love the community and you don't feel like it's safe for your family and for your children, then that's just a different story, right? And so I just wanted to be in a community that I felt like the Lord was calling us to. So my friend said, hey, I'm moving out of this house, and the guy that rents it to me said that if you paint it and you fix it up and get it ready to be moved into, then he'll keep the rent exactly what I've been paying it for however X amount of years. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. This is crazy. I was like, and I have more time than I have money, so I could fix that. I'll paint it, no problem. And so I said yes to it. And we're packed up, ready to move in. And then a week before we were supposed to move in, he said, hey man, the house that I was buying fell through. I'm not able to leave the house anymore. So I'm so sorry. I said, don't worry about it. I was bummed out, but I wasn't devastated. I was like, we kind of had our heart set on being in that home. But I wasn't discouraged by it at all. Maybe in my younger years, I don't know. Maybe in my younger years, I would have been devastated about it. I would have been really discouraged about it. But at this season of my life, I was just like, oh, that's okay. I know that God has something different, something better for me, right? And then a couple days later, my niece called me and said, hey, we bought a house, and we're moving out of the house that we live in North Redondo. And why don't you move in? None of them knew that we were looking to move out. None of my family knew that I usually say everything to everybody in my family, but this is just one of those things. I don't know. Maybe I didn't get around to it. I don't know, for some reason or another, I just didn't say anything. And then all of a sudden, the door opened up for us to move into a house that was a little bit larger, same amount of bathrooms, same amount of bedrooms, but larger, and much closer to the church, and which is what we really wanted. And so, it's my mom's house. It's the house that she owns. That she has two properties on her lot, and so the front house, and she lives in the back, and then my kids get to live in next to their grandma, and which I thought was great. And I love my mom. I get to say hi to her every day, and go and give her a hug, and then she'll talk to me for hours. If any of you have met my mom, and it was just really cool how the Lord worked that out. And so I just want to say that to encourage you guys to just trust the Lord, right? The steps of the righteous are ordered by him. And I don't say, and look, I recognize that I'm not righteous by anything that I've done, but only because of the grace of God that's on my life. And that the grace, there's nothing I could do to deserve it. There's nothing I could do to earn it, right? In fact, in my sinful state, I deserve hell. But God's gracious, and he gives me something that I'm absolutely not deserving of. And so the steps of the righteous are ordered by God. So I just want to encourage you as well that, I'm not there, I'm not this. I still have I don't say bad words out loud, but can I just be honest? When I'm on the 405 during rush hour traffic, I've thought them a couple times. But I know I'm not perfect, is what I'm saying. Okay? It's God's grace. And I just want to encourage you right now that if there's things that you've been dreaming of, or things that you've been desiring for you and for your family, then place it in God's hands. And when you have your heart set on something and it doesn't work out the way that you wanted, don't be discouraged by that. Right? The steps of the righteous are ordered by God. So if the steps of the righteous are ordered by God, well, so are the stops. So I received that stop as though it was from the Lord. But he wanted to position me so that I would be ready to step into the better thing that he had for me. And I was ready for that. It was already all packed up and all that stuff. And then I had to fix up 2 houses in the time that it would take me to fix up a 1-bedroom apartment, really something much smaller. And I had to end up in the matter of time to be able to have the house that I was leaving to have ready for the new renters to move in and get into it, and then also have the other house that we were moving into to have that ready for us to move into and get ready. And that was a huge undertaking. And so it was myself and my kids that were doing the work. And so I didn't have Joe De La Torre anymore to help me out with that. Otherwise, he would have. So that's extra. I just want to share that with you. I want to submit that to you and encourage you with that. But we can't tear down what we refuse to identify. And sometimes identifying things requires searching. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of kings to search it out. So sometimes we need to search things out in order for us to uproot what has been planted there so that God could come into the house and clean it. Right? So you can't confront what you haven't identified. If you can't name it, then you cannot confront it. You want to know what it is that you're confronting. If I did not expose the plumbing issues, I had to redo it all. I'm telling you, it was bad, all right? And it was stinky. And it was disgusting. I don't like that kind of stuff. But it was necessary. So if I wasn't able to name it, if I wasn't able to identify it, then I wouldn't be able to confront it, and I wouldn't be able to make that right. Right? And so I believe that there's a lot of believers that miss this. Because a lot of times we want to ignore something and just kind of move on and move past it without really confronting. But you know what that ends up doing? We see it we see it in relationships. When there's something that happens in a relationship, and then we leave that relationship, and we're like, I'm just moving on. But we don't confront the core problem. Then we end up carrying that, some people call it baggage, right? We carry that baggage into the next relationship. And then all of a sudden, we hear guys or girls saying, oh, you know what, I guess I'm just attracted to toxic people, right? I'm just attracted to toxic men. I'm just attracted to toxic girls. It's an easy escape for us to not take responsibility for the things that we should have in the season that they were exposed, where we could have uprooted it. But because we didn't uproot it in the season of exposure, we moved on, and now we carried that into the next relationship. Right? So this is discernment. And so a lot of believers, just a lot of people really miss this. We like to skip that part because it could get ugly. It means that we need to take responsibility for our own contribution to the, I'm just going to use this word. And I'm not saying that anybody's a failure, but I've failed a lot of times in my life. Okay? I think have we not failed? I mean, right? It means that we are taking responsibility for the failure in in those relationships? And how can I can't control what somebody else does, but I could control what I do at minimum, right? And I could take responsibility for that, and I could choose to do things differently going forward. So we label everything as the enemy, but not everything is a demon, right? Sometimes it's a mindset, it's a belief system. Sometimes it's a pattern in our life. Those things need to be broken, right? And the Kairos moment, the moment of opportunity to see those things broken is in the season that they are exposed. That's usually the time when people least want to address it, because that's when everything's come crashing down. So it's fight or flight, right? It's fight or flight. So when those things get exposed, we could either run away and say that we're moving on to ourselves, but really we know that we're just kidding ourselves, right? That there's no really moving on when the roots are still there, right? And so we cut it at the base, severed that relationship, and then we move on, and where we think there's a bougainvillea, there's something else that comes up underneath, and it begins to surface. And so it's not everything is a demon or the enemy, right? It could be like, but not always. It's a mindset. It's a renewed mind. That's not, the enemy didn't tell me to do that. I chose to do that, right? I chose to listen to a lie, to agree with a lie. And so when these things, the opportune moment is in uprooting things that are being exposed, is when they are at full exposure. Spiritual warfare, it could be unrenewed thinking. Sometimes what we call spiritual warfare is unrenewed thinking, right? Sometimes it's not oppression, it's just repetition. And we haven't changed that pattern in our own life. And so, how many of you guys have heard it said, what's that saying? The definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? Because it's like we keep agreeing with the same lie over and over and over again. And we take it from this place to that place to that place. It could even be with the work environment. Oh, you know what? Like in having chats with somebody that will have a job and then they get fired from that job. Oh, well, that boss really had it in for me. And then they move on to another job. Oh, you know what? From the day it started, I knew it was going to be failure because, they just weren't even, he wasn't a believer. And then go on to the next one. And then, oh, you know what? Now, that guy, I had a problem with that guy, and he was the son of the owner. And, come on. It's almost like there's always a reason for everything. Have you guys ever had chats, or have you guys ever been that person in any season in your life? Maybe you have. Maybe you broke that in your life. And but until we discern what the core, what the root issue is, until we discern what the root issue is, we will continue to fight the wrong battle. And then it'll just be discouragement after discouragement after discouragement after discouragement, over and over and over again, until that cycle is broken. How many of you guys have ever been there? Too many. I'm embarrassed to even, I don't think I have enough fingers or toes to even count how many times I've been there. I'm going on 49 years old this year. And I have failed way more times than I have succeeded in my life. But I'm not afraid of failure. In fact, I embrace failure. I would rather fail than quit. I would rather fail than quit. I've had that mentality for a long time. Sal, do you remember when you were in the training? I think you were in Missouri for customs, whatever state. I remember Sal gave me a call, and he was like, "Man, this is tough, man. I want to throw in the towel." I'm not here to throw you under the bus, but I just remember sharing one thing with you. I said, "You know what, Sal?" I said, "If you fail, then you fail. Go down trying, but don't quit." And we had this conversation over the phone. This was, how many years ago was that? 2008? And I remember sharing that, and I remember you sticking out. You went through it. It was a rigorous training, right, that you had to do. It was hard training for him to work in customs, as a federal agent and stuff. And he ended up passing with flying colors and doing an awesome job and pulling through. And he's been working that same job since 2008. And so for a long time, you've been there. And it's been a blessing to you and to your family. And I mean, could you imagine what would have happened if you quit, right? It would have been he's a really smart guy. I mean, he would have probably figured something else out, done something else, maybe gone back to school. He's really smart. And I don't know, I feel like academics kind of comes easy for people like him. For me, it takes extra work, but no, Sal's a very smart guy. He would have figured something else out. But this was what he had his heart set to, and he stuck with it, and he endured that struggle, and then he came out on top on the other side. Sometimes it looks like just continuing to fight that battle, going after that, overcoming that opposition. Here in Habakkuk chapter 2, it says here, "I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me." The rampart is it's a fortified wall, okay? Rampart is a fortified wall. It's like a watchman on the wall, and it's made for defense. And he said, "I will stand watch on the wall," right, "and watch and see what he will say to me." And so, do you see that? He said he will watch and he will see, because in the spirit, hearing and seeing are connected. He said, "I will watch and see what he will say to me." He didn't say, "I will listen and hear," right? I will watch and see. In the spirit, they're very connected. I will watch and see what he will say to me. And then in James chapter 1, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. And then Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 27, he says, my sheep hear my voice. So here's the truth, is that God is always speaking. In fact, I believe that if we have the Spirit of God living inside of us, which we do, right? Then he is never silent. He's our comforter. Absence doesn't equal comfort. I mean, I don't know, right? I do know. I know that absence does not equal comfort, okay? And so God is always speaking, but the question is, are we discerning what the Spirit of the Lord is saying? This is why something that I pray frequently, I pray it very often, and I prayed it today, that our ears would be more sensitive to hearing what the Spirit of the Lord is saying, and our eyes would be open and more sensitive to see what the Spirit of the Lord is doing, and that I would have boldness to partner with what he is doing and how he wants me to partner with him, right? So I ask God for that often. I never get tired of that. I don't think God gets tired of me asking for that, because I want to be more bold, right? In the book of 1 Corinthians, when the early church was being persecuted, they didn't ask God for shelter or to be hidden. They asked him for more boldness. And I just find that absolutely amazing. I'm like, wow, you guys are being killed for your faith, killed because of this bold stand that you have taken in Jesus in the most brutal way. And the thing that you ask God for is more boldness. I want to be more bold. When I have opposition coming my way, I want to take the same stand as the early church. I don't want, oh God, will you just take this all away from me? No, God, I want to be more bold. Give me strength, right? Give me strength in this season. And he's faithful. He's faithful. So one of the things is that we have reduced prayer to talking, where we feel like we have to talk. Talk to God. Let's do that. Talk to God. He loves to hear you. But if we would just stop and let him get a word in every now and again, I think that he has much more wisdom than I have, right? And he cares about my problems much more than I care about my problems. He cares about the salvation of loved ones more than I care about the salvation of loved ones, right? So if we would just let him speak. So prayer is not just speaking, it's listening. And we should listen twice as much as we talk. That's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, because we're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk. Right? So next time you're in prayer and you're talking for 10 minutes, right? Listen for 20. Listen for 20. Here's something. Here's I don't like to call things like systems or. Here's a rhythm for prayer. Watch, wait, listen, and then respond. A lot of times we watch and then we respond. Guilty of all charges. Been there, done that, over and over and over again. Okay? Sometimes I don't even watch, I just respond. Don't even know what I'm responding to. Who cares, right? No, we want to watch. We want to be aware, right? We want to wait. We want to not rush into anything. We want to listen. We want to hear God clearly, and we want to respond, and we want to move in obedience to what we've watched, to what we've waited for, and to what we have heard in his presence. That's when we respond. Now, I don't have that all dialed in yet, but I'm working on it, right? I'm working on it. This is what I'm going after. I don't have it perfected, but I'm moving in that direction. I'm getting better at it every day. Okay? Because when we skip listening to God, then we end up replacing his strategy with our own strategy, right? And our strategy could be passionate, right? But it won't be powerful. God's strategy is powerful, right? And in his presence, his strategy is revealed. His strategy is revealed. It's not invented. It's not mustered up, right? It's revealed. He will reveal to us his strategy. And we don't figure it out. We seek it out. We seek it out in his presence, right? There are divine strategies that are hidden. God does not hide things from you. He hides things for you. So that's why it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings to seek it out, to search it out. And so, we don't have to figure it out. We just have to seek it out. And so when we seek his face, right? And seek the kingdom and his righteousness, and everything else will be added unto you, like it says in Matthew. And so discernment keeps us from wasting our time. How many of you guys don't want to waste your time, right? I don't want to waste my time. Discernment keeps us from fighting the wrong battles. How many of you guys, can it get exhausting fighting, right? Come on. Like, sometimes we just need to choose what battle that we want to fight. And that is found in the secret place, in spending time with the Lord and him revealing stuff. And then he gives us a strategy on how to approach it. And discernment also helps us or keeps us from misusing our authority. So God's not, he's not in the business of just having us pray more, right? It's not like I hear people say a lot, and I've said it a lot. Oh, you pray hard. Pray hard for this one, right? Like, that just requires so much sweat. When we look in the book of Leviticus on what the priests are supposed to wear when they would go into the presence of God, it said that they're supposed to wear fine linen, right? Has anybody ever been to the Caribbean? So in the Caribbean, we have these guayaberas. It's the Cubans are the ones that made them first for picking the guavas, right? And they have these pockets, and they would put in the pockets some of the guavas that they wanted to keep for themselves. And so that's kind of the story behind it. In Puerto Rico, they have them as well. They're made of linen. And it's because it's a very breathable material, and it's very humid in the Caribbean. And so it requires you, it makes you so you don't sweat as much, okay? And so it's a very breathable material. And so the priests were required to wear fine linen. And I believe that it's because in order because they're required in going into the presence of God to not sweat. Because going into the presence of God should not be something that is done on your own effort, but it's his goodness that draws you in, right? And so it's not like we're praying hard. Like, oh. And look, I work up a sweat. You guys know me. In the summer months, I crank the AC and people start freezing, and we see it's whatever, 90 degrees outside, and people would come to church with jackets. I know. And Pastor Joe's like, hey, it's freezing in here. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm burning up. but no, it's so God, it's not like pray harder or pray more, just discern better. So if we could discern what God's doing, then it's not, and we have that awareness when we have an increased sensitivity to what the Holy Spirit is doing or what the Holy Spirit is saying, then it's just a matter of following his lead. He is the forerunner. He's the one that is paving the way, and all we have to do is follow his lead. I love that Pastor Joe says all the time. He says, Jesus is the pastor of this church, and we simply follow his lead. And that's something that's what we want to do. I don't want that just for Coast Christian Fellowship. I want that for Eric John David Fonseca. I want that for me, right? I want that for you. I want you to be able to just follow Jesus' lead. Can you imagine if we did that in every aspect of our life? With our business or our work or our relationships? Can you imagine if we just determined in our hearts to simply follow the leading of the Holy Spirit? Imagine what kind of breakthrough and what kind of reward is on the other side. And you're like, wow, then people will say stuff to you like, man, it just comes easy for you, doesn't it? Well, I don't know about that, but God is faithful, right? So right where you're at, I want you to just close your eyes with me and just ask God, say, just ask God, what am I really dealing with? Not what I assume, not what I felt, okay? But what is the truth? And after you ask God that, I want you to wait and listen. What am I dealing with, God? Now ask God, what is your strategy? Because when discernment comes, clarity comes. And when clarity comes, authority follows. So we ask God, what is your strategy? And I just feel like the Lord is saying that I am removing confusion from my people. And where there has been misrepresentation, where there has been misdiagnosis, where there has been misaligned thinking, I feel like the Lord is just saying, I am bringing clarity. Because for some people, confusion has kept you fighting the wrong battles. Confusion has kept you rebuking what you should be renewing and resisting what you should be confronting. But I believe that God is going to bring a shift in our hearts and our minds right now. So just posture your heart, put your hand on your heart, just posture yourself to receive from the Lord. We don't need music. We don't need to be called out. We don't need somebody to just name everything that we're going through or dealing with. We just need to turn our affections towards Him. Right? So we ask, we listen. And when we listen, we don't rush it. Because prayer includes watching, waiting, and listening. So while you're watching, waiting, and listening, just pay attention to any thoughts that rise up, any areas that God highlights, any patterns that might come to your mind. That's discernment being activated inside of you right now. Now say this, just say, God, expose every mindset, every belief, and every pattern that is not from you. Because I recognize that not everything is a demon. Some things are agreements that I've made. Some things can be lies that I've believed. Some things are cycles that I've normalized and accepted. And then ask God again, say, Lord, what is your strategy? So just catch this right now from God. So it might not be dramatic. It might be something simple. It might be you have to change the way that you think about that. Change the way that you respond. Change what you say. Change what you tolerate. Change what you've been repeating. Here, I want you to make this declaration right now. Lord, I receive with clarity. And I receive discernment. I will no longer fight the wrong battles. I will walk in your strategy, not my own. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So I just release over you right now clarity over confusion, all right? Wisdom over frustration, all right? And strategy over struggle. And I just pray right now in the name of Jesus, Lord, I just pray that the words of our mouths and the meditation of our heart, Lord, would be pleasing in your sight, Lord. May you be glorified in every aspect of our life, Lord. Make our ears more sensitive to hear what the Spirit of the Lord is saying. Our eyes more sensitive to see what the Spirit of the Lord is doing. And God, would you give us boldness so that we could partner with you in what you are doing and what you are saying. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, bless you guys.